In this video, we're going to look to recreate the everything, everywhere, all at once fragmented mirror look inside of Adobe After Effects utilizing Boris Effects' Continuum. Let's dive right in. Now, if you didn't know, the everything, everywhere, all at once mirror fragmented look was actually created using Boris Effects' Continuum and BCC plus Prism. We're going to take a look at creating that though from scratch inside of Adobe After Effects. And let's break it down into 3 manageable stages. Stage 1 is going to be about creating the initial energy field before the fragment, as well as multiple variations of our clip. Stage 2 is going to be about further varying our shots in 3D and then adding distortion to individual fragments. For our final stage, we're going to look at adding the final effects and then further repetition to our composite to really sell the look. So I'm here inside of Adobe After Effects where I've already chosen the 2 shots that I'm going to use for this tutorial. Ideally, you're going to want to have 1 shot of action that you can vary. So hopefully it's long so you can vary the timing, or alternatively, a second shot, which I have in this instance, that has a similar action that we can then just add to the fragmented mirror look. In addition to this, I also have a glass texture element that I grabbed from Envato Elements, but there are several places that we can grab this online. If I scrub forward, there are several mirror fragments in this one video clip, and this is going to be the frame that we're going to be using as our main source for creating the fragmentation. Now to get started, I'll grab the main source clip and drop it into a composition. I'll go to my composition settings and let's just set the time code to be 0 and start deciding on the timing of when we want to switch over to the mirror fragmented multiverse. So it's going to be at 1 second and 10 frames. And just before that, we want to have some energy lead up to that point. And that will start at 10 seconds and then drift down at the 1 second and 10 frame mark. First of all, let's get in our mirror element to help with timing. That in my case is the good glass. I'm going to double click that footage clip, bring it into the layer level, and then just trim this down before bringing it into the timeline. So again, this is the frame that I want to bring in. I'll just press Option right square bracket to trim it to this point. And then just a few frames earlier, I'll press Option left square bracket or Alt left square bracket on a PC. Let's bring it into the timeline, aligning the playheads to that 1 second point. In order to get the timing right, since I want the fragment to already be in place at this point, I'm just going to press the right square bracket on my keyboard, and we should see that the mirror fragments are now in place. This asset happens to be bigger than my video file, so I'm just going to scale it down a little bit in order to fit the comp, followed by switch its blend mode to add to knock out the black. Now that I have the glass in place, let us now create a hold frame out of the fragments that we like. So in order to accomplish that, with the clip selected, heading to the layer menu, we'll go to time, enable time remapping. Here's the time remapping property. It shows up here in the timeline. I'm going to click to add a keyframe to reference this frame at the 1523 mark on the clip. Now I'm going to extend this shot, select this keyframe, press Command C to copy it, go to the end and press Command V to paste it. Now you can see that the mirror fragment is now still to the very end. Excellent. Let's go to 10 seconds here inside our timeline, and I'm going to go to Layer, Adjustment Layer. I'll trim the adjustment layer to the 10 frame mark, move forward to 1 second and 10 frames to trim the out point, which is going to represent how we eventually transition to this fragmented glass and all of the mirror segments. So to do that, we'll use 2 energy sources. One is camera shake and the other is wave to add a distortion field on top. Under your effects and presets, let's do a search for camera, and under the BCC lens category with Continuum installed, you'll find camera shake. We can apply it to the adjustment layer, and if you press the effects editor button, we'll be able to go inside and preview several different presets, which will change the parameter properties that you see listed here on the right to shake our footage. Since we want a keyframed look, I'm actually going to cancel out of here and build this from scratch. One thing controlling the shakiness is the amplitude value, and then another is the translation value, which is kind of like how much it shakes from one translation point to another. By default, I want to set that translation to 0 and the amplitude to 0 at the 10 frame mark. Let's add 2 keyframes at this point, and right when that glass comes in at 1 second, this is where we want it to have it at the strongest value. So I'm going to increase the amplitude and also the translation here. We don't need to keyframe the speed. We're just going to set this to a higher value, like 250. If I play this back, we now have a bit of shakiness. This could actually add even more shakiness in this case. So I'm going to press the U key and make sure I'm around the amplitude. I'm going to increase that even further to a value of 300. And then just as a final step, go to the end of the adjustment layer, which happens to be at 1 second and 10 frames. Just make sure that the amplitude is now set to 0, followed by the translation value. So we ramp up and then ramp really down. Let's add another distortion element by going to the effects category and doing a search for wave. Well, we'll find the BCC wave effect. I'll click the disclosure triangle to close the camera shake and then just add BCC wave after it. Adds a little bit of a distortion field on top of the clip. I'm going to bring down the perpendicular height, try to find the value that I'm going to want when this is at its maximum. That's the 1 second mark. Same thing with the wave width. So ideally, I want this to be really large at the height and then come back to its value of 0 at the 1 second and 10 frame mark. Let's just start from the 10 frame mark again, add a keyframe to the wave width and the perpendicular height, setting these values to 0, moving forward, increasing the perpendicular height subtly, and then really increasing the wave width, and then moving to the 1 second and 10 frame mark, I'm going to set these values back down to 0. So it's a quick burst, just like the camera shake in terms of energy. Last but not least, we can turn on motion blur for the comp, toggle the switches and modes to turn on motion blur for all 3 of our layers, but then turn it back off on our comp as we continue to work. Now that we have the timing of our energy source followed by when the mirror fragment comes in, we want to make multiple variations of our bass clip and fit them in some of these mirror fractures. With the bass clip selected, just press Command D or Control D 3 times to make multiple copies. We want these to start just a few frames before the crash. So let's move 4 frames back before the mirror crash, select all 3 of those clips, and then trim the endpoint Option left square bracket or Alt left square bracket just to come in right before that. We're going to affect the position of each of these clips right now in 2D space to be in certain areas of the fragment. So we can press the P key, add a keyframe by clicking on the stopwatch. Let's just move to an area where we can see all the mirror fragments. And temporarily, I'm just going to turn off the adjustment layer, which contains the shake and the wave. Now, one of the advantages of having camera shake on the adjustment layer means that all of the heavy lifting is going to be done from that one layer that we decide to place underneath it, including any other duplicates that we may make of this video, as well as other videos that we might bring inside this composition, and start to move these around to different areas where I can create fractures. So I'll deselect all those clips and select the first clip on top and move my first shot a little bit up and to the left. I'll turn that off by clicking on the eye icon, select my second clip, drag this down, turn off the eyeball, select the third clip, drag this to the right, trying to position it around the mirror fragments where I think it would work really well. And now we have a split that happens right before the mirror fragment. Since I keyframe this a little bit further down, I'm going to select all 3 of these keyframes and just move it closer to the first keyframe so that the distance between these 2 is really short. So 4 frames in total. Now that that's all in place and we can see our fragment, let's start to mask each of these shots. Select the clip on top, turn it back on, and start to draw a mask around some of these fractures. Pen tool will do just fine. I'll draw around these edges here and make a rough mask shape to start with. Just keep in mind that more than likely to get the variation that you're looking for, you'll want to refine this over and over again as you continue to work. I'll close out that first segment and then just press the F key for feather in order to feather it, and then repeat that by turning on the second layer that I moved. My mask pen tool is still selected. I'll create another mask around this fragment, feather it, and then repeat that for the last shot. Great, so I have now my 3 clips masked, and I'm going to just turn back on the adjustment layer so we can take a look at how they separate. This is looking pretty good. We might want to make some adjustments to certain clips where we hit their edge. This could involve taking off the mask altogether, just making sure that we don't get close to the edge of the video so it doesn't appear in the mirror fragment shots. Other options, of course, include extending the mask where required to go over the different fractured sections. Now that this is set up, it might be advantageous to go through this and change some of the timing of each of these clips. This could be done in a few different ways. One is by selecting a given shot, moving it further down, extending its length, but then moving the keyframes that were on that shot back to the place where the clip starts. We have a slightly different timing of action that takes place in the mask. So I'll repeat that for my other two shots. So now I have a slightly different timing between each of the three shots that I've just masked out. And now it's time to repeat this process, but on a separate clip or even a separate timed piece of action. Earlier in this tutorial, if I go back to my project, I have another clip that has very similar action, but it's just in slow motion. I'm just going to double click it as I've already created some endpoints around it of what I like. I'm going to just drag my playhead in the timeline of where I want that to begin. This mirror clip that's slower. I want to align the playheads right there in the time area. And at this point in time, I want this clip to be masked several different times and in various positions within the mirror fractures. So I'll make 3 copies again. And just to double check the timing of each of these masked clips, just press U, followed by selecting all 3 of those copies and pressing P and starting to move these around the screen in positions that I find interesting. So this is good to start to add keyframes at this point, but just move your playhead a little bit later on where you can see the overall mask. So it's a good time to turn off that shake, then start moving each of these elements in place to where you want them to be, masking them, and then perfecting the timing of your keyframes. We're going to pick up this project from after that's complete. Okay, let's look at what we have so far since we last left off. I'm going to move my current time indicator to the beginning of this project and press the space bar. We have that energy movement, and now we have more fractures. So I'm just going to solo each of the clip that we just brought in. Let's also just see it with the glass overlaid on top of it. Now, if I select each of these 3 clips and just press the U key, you can see the keyframes for each of them from moving in place from their original position, spreading out into the fragmented elements. The other thing to note is that these were initially at 0 opacity and keyframed up to 100% opacity so that we don't see them just pop onto screen. Now, in addition to this, some work was done with the positions of these in Z-space by making every single one of these clip layers 3D and affected by an After Effects camera. To show this a bit clearer, I'm actually going to switch to 2 views here, select all of the elements in my comp, and a little trick is to actually press the C key to go to your camera orient tool, followed by F to frame everything to the window. If I select one of these clips and then just command upward arrow in my layer panel, I can see that each of these are spread out in Z-space. So we have the main clip there on the backward plane, and then each of the fragments mostly ahead of that main plane. Some of them even rotated. This is just to add a little bit more interest in the look. And in addition to this, we brought in an After Effects camera, which I'll double click, that's 2-node and its depth of field is enabled. In addition to that, its focus distance is right now set to the back main plane, allowing for a bit of blur on our front-facing layers. I'll press cancel, followed by 1 view so we can see this. I'll just click on and off the camera so you can see the slight shift in the clips, not to mention the bit of blur that's been added on top of that. Now, one thing that you could do, you might find another clip here or another fragment that you want to focus on and then have everything else out of focus, depending on how you set this up, is to select your camera, followed by the main clip, and then from the layer menu, you can go to camera, set focus distance to layer so that that's in focus, and then set your blur settings from there so that everything else is out of focus. Now that this variation has been set up, it's time to add some distortion to some of these fragmented elements. I'm going to start by adjusting this layer here on the top left-hand corner, and I want to distort this in a way where the distortion doesn't extend beyond the boundaries of the mask. So for that, I'll rely on pre-composing, press Shift-Command-C. Let's call this D effects for distortion. I'll leave all the attributes so the mask will be available inside this comp, but then open up the new composition. It's here where I'll apply my first distortion effect, which is actually something native in After Effects called flip. You can see there that it allows you to flip your image either in height or in width, but also add a skew. It would be helpful though if we made these adjustments while looking at our main comp. So for that, in the Effect Controls panel, I'm going to lock it, head back to the Stage 2 comp there in the timeline. Let's just adjust the scale height back to its default by setting it to 100. And then I'm going to make the scale width -100. We can see the image is flipped. In addition to this, we can add some skew to the image, which will change its perspective. In addition to this, let's look at what BCC has to offer. I'm going to do a search for the word lens, and under the BCC lens category, there are two effects that we can rely on: lens distortion and wide angle lens. And while you can use these to correct distortion filmed by your camera, they also make great stylistic effects. I'll apply it, in this case, to my locked effect controls panel, so it's added on top. I'll increase the distortion here to a positive number. And because, again, this is happening before the masking in terms of order of operations, it's not extending beyond it. I'll also increase the curvature of this effect, seeing all of the changes I make inside my main composition. I'll repeat that step to another clip. And in this case, it's time to unlock the Effect Controls panel. I'll select another fragment, press Shift-Command-C, calling it D Effects as well. Same process of leaving all attributes in Stage 2 and then opening the new composition. If I look at Stage 2 again and just press M for mask, and when I step inside the pre-comp, I'm free to now start adding distortion. In this case, I'm going to apply lens distortion again. Let's lock this panel, go back to the Stage 2 comp. I want to show one additional thing that's really special about this effect. I'll exaggerate this distortion beyond what I want to a positive number, and you'll notice that its edge mode is currently set to transparent, which is why it's revealing another clip that's underneath here. One thing we can do with the edge mode is actually set it to something like repeat, and the image is now repeated, but still contained within the mask. Obviously, this distortion is too much, but it's just a really handy effect where we're trying to add distortion and push it, but also make sure that what's inside the mask doesn't get too small or too large. In addition to lens distortion, if I turn that off, we also have a BCC plus wide angle lens, and this also has a distortion and X and Y correction that we can take advantage of for this comp. I'll just remove that and add the lens distortion, and I encourage you to play with some of these effects for additional mirror fragments before we move on to the final stage of this tutorial. All right, let's look at what we've done so far. I'll play this back again. We've got that camera shake, not to mention that wave effect, and we've masked out several elements from two different shots, putting them in the fractured elements. And if I double click one of these pre-comps add effects, we've added the lens distortion in several places. And that lens distortion is limited to the masked area because of the pre-composition. Now for the final stages of this project, let's select all of the layers within our composition and create a pre-comp. We'll call this mirror look. And with that pre-comp selected, we might want to even create more variation in our fractures because of some of the effects that we're overlaying. So this can be done before or after those final steps, but you simply duplicate all of those fractured elements. And let's just say that we scale up this image slightly. We can now select a region of that image that we might want to be slightly offset from our original plate. I'll feather the mask and make sure that this does not appear until the camera shake is well underway. So 20 frames, and I'll add some keyframes of a fade in of 3 seconds for the opacity of this layer. Now for the final look, let's go to the layer menu and create an adjustment layer. We're going to call this Prism and Final Distort. And we don't want this layer to start until the 10 frame mark, so we can trim it to that point. And now let's add the BCC Prism effect. Under the stylized category, you'll see two prisms. You want the BCC with the plus. I'll make sure I move till after the shake so we can see this clearly. And a great way to start with this effect is to go to the effects editor and see some of the variations that are available to you to create a chromatic aberration look, which goes really well when done subtly with this mirror fragment look. Since we're keyframing this, I'm just going to start with the defaults. I'll apply that to head back into After Effects. And ideally, we'd like to ramp this up so it's a very strong prism at the height of the shake at 1 second, and ramp it down then to 1 second and 10 frames so it's a bit more subtle after we've transitioned to these fragments. So I'll just move to the 10 frame mark where this clip starts and what's controlling this look is the prism weight. So I'll start it at 0. And another element that we're going to want to keyframe is we can either do the scale start or the scale end. So I'll do the scale end. Let's move to 1 second, and I'll increase the prism weight to 100 so we start getting this look. But then also we can control the stepping process between the prism colors, which are red, green, and blue at the moment. By changing the scale end, you can see that we can see the prism effect much more clearly, and there's more distance between that red, green, and blue prism. Which, by the way, if I go to the short color, we can easily change to any color that we want. So it doesn't even have to be the natural chromatic aberration colors, creating some really unique looks. This is at the height of the shake, so I'll move to 1 second and 10 frames now and make the scale end and scale start a lot closer together. Let's settle on a value of 95 so that prismatic effect is less. I could also bring down the prism weight. So I'll bring it to 75 so it's a lot more subtle. So looking at this look, at 1 second we have the height of the prism, now with the color purple, and we settle down the effect when it reaches the 1 second and 10 frame mark. Last but not least, in the effects and presets, let's just add an overall lens distortion effect to the adjustment layer. So I'll apply that to the clip, and the distortion we can set to an amount of -1. We want this to not start at that amount at the beginning of the adjustment layer. So I will add a keyframe next to distortion, set that to 0, and then at 1 second, we can have the distortion amount at -1. Could also make it a lot crazier, so it becomes really distorted at the height of the shake, but then settles down for that overall look that you see here. And that's how we create that fragmented look from everything, everywhere, all at once using After Effects, as well as Boris Effects Continuum for Prism and a lot of the other stylistic effects. You can check out to see how the VFX team of Everything, Everywhere, All at Once broke this down in a live webinar available on our YouTube channel. And for more tips and tricks just like this, don't forget to click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.